Welcome everyone to this explainer. Picture this right now: crowded offices, endless meetings, overflowing inboxes, and exhausted employees staring blankly at screens, literally counting down the minutes until they can finally escape. We've all been there, right? Well, today, we're going on a cinematic deep dive into the absolute death of traditional work culture. We're going to explore the rise of a massive career rebellion, and it's being led primarily by a new generation that is fundamentally rethinking what it means to be successful.
To really understand why this rebellion is happening, we have to look at the reality of the modern workday. According to recent data from Desk Time, where they tracked thousands of workers, over 80% of U.S. workers stay late 4 out of every 5 workdays. 80%! Let that sink in for a second. The idea of clocking out right at 5 p.m. has become way more of a myth than a reality for the vast majority of us.
And you know, when you add all of those late nights up, the picture gets even more intense. The staggering U.S. average is now nearly 45 hours worked per week. That is a massive chunk of our waking lives dedicated solely to labor. And it really begs the question, are we working to live, or are we just living to work?
Okay, let's dive into this. The whole 9 to 5 thing, it's basically extinct. Actually, scratch that. It's totally extinct. What we've actually created is a grueling 9 to 6 reality. This shift is heavily fueled by a culture of hyperproductivity, where, technology hasn't necessarily given us more free time. Instead, it's just blurred the boundaries between our personal and professional lives. In an era of rapid automation and economic shifts, so many workers feel this immense pressure to constantly prove their value by simply being always on.
The modern office has essentially become a breeding ground for exhaustion and disengagement. When you combine those insane working hours with a rigid demand for physical presence, it takes a massive physical and psychological toll. It is, without a doubt, the central crisis of our modern economy. People are hitting a wall, and it's manifesting in a very specific, highly measurable way.
Section 1, the psychology of resenteeism.
We've moved way past simple burnout and entered a fascinating, albeit super troubling, new territory in occupational psychology. It's called resenteeism. Coined by the software provider RotaCloud, this is a phenomenon where employees stay in jobs they deeply dislike purely because they feel financially or professionally trapped. Think of it as an evolution of quiet quitting, but far more toxic. Under the job demands resources model, resenteeism is triggered when workload demands vastly exceed an employee's autonomy and support. So they don't just disengage, they actively resent their entire situation.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how these trapped workers visibly act out their frustration. They completely withdraw from company culture. They reduce their discretionary effort, which basically means they stop volunteering for any extra tasks. But it gets louder. We start seeing cyber-venting on social media and this deep organizational cynicism that completely destroys trust. This kind of negativity, it's incredibly contagious, and it spreads like wildfire across teams.
And hey, if you're thinking this is just a personal grievance issue, think again. The macroeconomic cost of all this workplace disengagement is a staggering $8.9 trillion to the global GDP. To put that into perspective, that's roughly 9% of global GDP just vanishing. This isn't just about unhappy employees, it is a literal global economic crisis caused by rigid, outdated work structures.
Section 2, Gen Z's career rebellion.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what this rebellion looks like. Upwork's recent data proves that the youngest generation entering the workforce is actively abandoning corporate structures. Over half of them, 52%, are already freelancing. Compare that to 44% of millennials and just 30% of Gen X. Gen Z isn't just dreaming of a different way to work, they are actively building it right now, far outside the traditional corporate walls.
In fact, 39% of these Gen Z freelancers identify as what researchers call portfolio careerists. They completely reject the idea that a career is a single ladder you climb at one company for 40 years. No way. Instead, they view their careers as dynamic, multifaceted portfolios of different projects, clients, and skills. They are diversifying their income and their interests by choice, not by necessity.
And obviously, technology has made these alternative career paths more accessible than ever before. 70% of Gen Z freelancers say they do it specifically for schedule flexibility. Furthermore, 61% of them are aggressively adopting emerging technologies like AI to empower this location-independent lifestyle. They're working from cafes, home offices, co-working spaces, and while traveling the globe,
fully leveraging digital tools to maintain their ultimate autonomy.
Section 3, the office in the cloud trap. Let's move to and see how this builds, because corporations haven't been completely blind to this desire for flexibility, but their basic remote work attempts are failing to fix the core problem.
This quote from the Async First playbook hits the nail right on the head. Simply moving physical meetings to Zoom and replicating desk tabs with constant Slack notifications doesn't grant true autonomy. It just creates constant, nonstop digital interruptions. It mimics the office in the cloud, recreating the exact same inefficiencies and bleeding work into personal time, which, as you can guess, only fuels that resentment we talked about earlier.
Section 4. Designing the Future. Async and ROW.
So what is the actual solution to completely unbind work from strict time constraints? We need to shift from synchronous to asynchronous work. Synchronous work relies on the manager's schedule, constant meetings, reactive communication, everyone needing to be online at exactly the same time. Asynchronous work, on the other hand, respects the maker's schedule. It allows for deep, uninterrupted focus, where collaboration happens across distributed time zones without needing simultaneous presence. It's all about measuring outcomes, not hours logged.
So the crucial point is implementing a results-only work environment, or ROW. To do this, companies must first disconnect presence from output. Second, they have to default to rich, clear, written communication rather than calling a 30-minute meeting for every single question. And third, they must empower time independence. When you replace arbitrary office hours with actual measurable productivity, you foster immense trust and drastically reduce turnover.
The advantages of an async-first approach are absolutely profound. Teams reclaim massive amounts of time for deep, focused work. Knowledge sharing becomes totally frictionless because everything is documented. Plus, it's incredibly inclusive for neurodiverse workers, caregivers, and introverts. When paired with modern adaptations like compressed 4-day workweeks, this model directly combats resenteeism by restoring the one thing workers are so desperate for: autonomy and essential recovery time.
Which brings us to our final thought. With Gen Z proving that high-level work can be done on flexible, portfolio-based terms, and with all the data showing the sheer economic and mental costs of our current system, is the traditional 9-to-5 becoming completely obsolete? Will the future of success simply be defined by freedom, flexibility, and meaningful results rather than fixed office hours? I leave that for you to decide. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to rethink how your own work life might look in a results-only future. See you next time.